2 years ago, I made this game here, which is probably my best ever game, Ravager Hill. The objective is very simple. You travel around the arena collecting snowballs while avoiding the Ravagers, and then you bring those snowballs to the centre to shoot the targets to win. And that is the entire game. It was a lot of fun to play. We also made a multiplayer version, which was a lot of fun. People on the server really enjoyed it. And I want to do something similar again, but I'm really not a fan of remaking the exact same game. So for this video, I just want to talk through some of my ideas for a potential kind of spiritual sequel to Ravager Hill. It will be a more complex game, a more interesting game, but it will hopefully be just as fun. So I think for this video, I'm actually going to play this game whilst I'm talking about my ideas. So let's give this a go. Now, the main thing and the most important thing of this game is that dodging and outsmarting Ravagers is the main feature, right? That will be the focal point, that will be the thing that is most fun, because it is fun, that is what inspired this. Watching people play Decked Out 2 and enjoy those first 2 levels of dodging and outsmarting the Ravagers was just the best part of Decked Out for me. And so that is what inspired this game originally. So that will be the focus, which means we need to encourage the players to travel around the map for some kind of purpose, which will mean they will then interact with the Ravagers across the map. But what we also need is lots of doorways and obstructions. So you'll notice that we bumped into a lot of Ravagers earlier, but then they soon forgot about me, and that means they would then redirect to a different target, for example. So like all of those Ravagers have now stopped chasing after me, I hope. I could see one poking its head out over there. But if there was another player around there, they would then start targeting that player. And that worked really well in the multiplayer competitive version of Ravager Hill in Season 6 of Zcraft. But one of the key differences that we will have with this new game that I'm trying to create is it will be a mostly cooperative game. So I want to also take some inspiration from something like Among Us, where there is a team of good people who have to complete objectives, and there is maybe 1 or 2 bad people, some villains, who are trying to sabotage the good people. Oh. Now, one thing to note on that, I don't think I want the villain to be secretive. I don't think I want it to have that kind of psychological aspect of Among Us, where you've got to kind of deduce who the villain is. I think I want it known from the very beginning, and the villain will be able to play the game in very different ways. So let's say there are 3 heroes and 1 villain, right? The heroes will only have 1 life each. They will have to cooperate to try and complete whatever the objective is, and then the 1 villain has unlimited lives. That villain can just throw itself at the Ravagers if it wants, if it thinks it will help the villain to complete its objective, right? So for example, I could be in the centre here where the heroes are, and I could intentionally die so that the Ravagers immediately redirect towards the heroes. Now, I do think I want the villain to also have some other powers. Maybe they can go invisible if they want. Maybe they can end a pearl around. Again, to try and help them redirect the Ravagers. I'm thinking if you're the villain and you're travelling around, you might be intentionally collecting a group of Ravagers like this. Bringing them all over to an important place, maybe one of the objective places, and then you end a pearl away, and then suddenly all of those Ravagers are targeting the heroes, right? I think that could be really fun. And then the heroes see the villain, if they're not invisible, and might start freaking out, thinking, oh, what's their plan? What equipment do they have? What, how are they trying to sabotage things? And I think that could add some, you know, some drama and some interesting gameplay. We're doing very well in this game here. And so I do need to think about what other powers the villain can have. And I'm thinking I might also limit the villain's inventory. So, you know, let's say they have a room that they can access. Oh, we're just about to win here. Yay, we won. There you go, you can get me. So let's say they have a room that they can access, maybe kind of like this, where they can go in, get an invisibility potion, some ender pearls, maybe some food, maybe a slowness potion or something like that, or some cobwebs, you know, anything that they can use to try and distract and slow down the heroes. But maybe they only have 1 or 2 inventory slots, and we block out the rest of their inventory, because you can do that quite easily. You know, the way that you can do that is you can just hold right click and like block everything off there. The only thing I would need to make sure is that this is not an item that is used in any of the, you know, the objectives that the heroes are trying to complete. You know, for example, if we had something that uses a fishing rod, which is one of my ideas, we wouldn't want sticks to be the inventory filler item, because then that gives the heroes some sticks that they can use to craft. So depending on what the objectives are, we will pick something here that is essentially completely useless in the game. And then they can go to their kind of area underneath the game. They can pick out what item they want to take up into the arena, and then they can mess around, use the item, come back, and get another item. And similar to Among Us, I'm thinking there could be some like scaffolding holes that maybe they can drop down in and the players aren't allowed to go into, that connect around the map and that lead them to their storage. So now let's do something a little bit different. I'm over here in Photoshop and I just want to kind of draw a few things to give you some ideas of my plans here. So the arena will probably be another circle. Let's kind of do it at an angle here. So we're kind of looking down at it. And I do think the main focal point should probably be in the middle. I think that worked very well in Ravager Hill because, firstly, we could make it a hill and mobs like to try to reach the highest point that they can. So making that a hill means that the Ravagers aren't going to get lost in one corner. I'm not too worried about that in this game because we have the villain who can then go and gather those Ravagers, right? So I'm not too fussed about the Ravagers getting stuck, but I do still think having the focal point be in the middle is really important. And what we want to do here, can you tell that I'm an artist? Is we want to have a rocket ship in the middle. I'm not trying to make this look good, by the way. I'm just talking through my ideas. But the idea and a little bit of lore, I don't want the lore to make perfect sense, but I'd like, you know, to be some kind of design inspiration for the game, is that maybe something has gone wrong on the planet. Maybe it's like nuclear fallout and we have our heroes and they need to escape the planet and there's a rocket, but there's something wrong with the rocket, right? It's almost ready to launch, but there's some things that they need to do to fix the rocket. And then in this room, if we go with yellow, there will be like maybe a bunch of different possible objectives, right? And this will be where there's like a randomizer. I'm thinking these will be chests because you can block a chest from being opened, right? So we will enable one chest, and that one chest will be like, we need some cod oil, for example. We need some cod oil for the rocket, so go and get a cod. And then what the players have to do is they have to travel around the map to a bunch of landmarks that will be in buildings kind of all around the edge of the map. And ideally, I want there to be lots of these. The Ravagers will probably be able to go inside them. But I want there to be lots of different and recognizable landmarks, right? I don't want these to all look like the same building. So, for example, we need a fishing rod to get this cod oil. We know where the pond is. We've seen the pond. Let's say there's a pond over here. But we need a fishing rod, which means we need sticks and we need string. But we saw something here that references spiders, right? So one player knows that they can go over here and there's something involving spiders that allows them to get strings. There's some button they can press or barrel that they can go into or something that they can interact with to obtain some string. And then the other player is right, okay, I saw a wooden building over here that looked like a sawmill. Maybe we go there and we can get some sticks. And that's great. And then maybe there's another place with a crafting table. Maybe there's a few of those dotted around, I'm not too sure. But then the players have to travel around the map, again, dodging the Ravagers and trying to avoid whatever the villain is trying to do. And they then have to craft the fishing rod, fish in the pond to get the cod, and then come back to the centre here to submit the cod in whichever barrel or chest required it. And then once that's submitted, another objective will be chosen. And I think that makes the most sense. I think it makes sense to only show one objective. So the players have to work together for that single objective rather than showing all 3 or 4 objectives and getting people to do them at the same time. I think it's better to do them in sequence. And I'm thinking 3 or 4 is probably the way to go. I wouldn't want this game to last too long, but it needs to last long enough for the villain to really be able to have some impact, right? So this cod oil one, for example, where you've got to go to 3 different points on the map and fish, like fishing takes a long time, especially if there's Ravagers chasing you. So that will probably be one of the hardest objectives. I'll want to come up with some little puzzles in some of these that are like, you know, maybe there's one that's just a series of buttons and it randomizes which button is right every time. And so you've got to take your time pushing all of the buttons. Again, all the while, there's a Ravager chasing you down. So that's the logic in here. You know, there will be lots of walls. Within the style that I'm going for here, it will probably be Fallout inspired, maybe. So lots of buildings from a specific era in time, but they're all kind of falling apart. So there will be big open entries to the buildings where the Ravagers can get inside. There may be some carpet that I use where you can kind of like section off different areas to stop the Ravagers from breaking through. I'm not too sure about that because we didn't need that in Ravager Hill. You know, there were 13 Ravagers in the multiplayer version, and those Ravagers could go anywhere at any point, and it worked really well. There was sometimes a big clump in the middle, but that was good because then the people playing the game had to lure those Ravagers out and go in a different way, and that added to the gameplay. So that's where I am at the moment. I haven't thought of many tasks that could be done. There's maybe one where you have to get some kelp from an underwater section, maybe like a sewer area, and then you have to bring that kelp to a campfire and cook it and bring that to the center. I would also like to do some puzzles, like actual puzzles, where you have to solve something. The problem with that is everything in this game needs to be resettable, right? I'm confident that I can reset this start bit because the logic here is not actually that complex. There's just, 3 goals. There'll be 2 droppers facing each other with 3 items in. And once those 3 items goes through, you win, right? And then this will just be probably 1 or 2 shulker box randomizers, which means we could have up to 18 objectives, which I think would be more than enough. But all of these objectives around the outside also need to be resettable, right? So the way that we get string, the way that we get sticks, that needs to be infinite. This button pressing thing, needs to swap to a different button every round, right? But it still needs to be active. There's a lot to consider with these challenges. But if you have any ideas of a little puzzle, a little challenge, I use Among Us as the inspiration idea for that, because Among Us has you do lots of small activities around the map. So I'm not inspired by the psychological falling out with your friends idea of Among Us. I'm more interested in the actual tasks themselves. And we could do the traditional, find a snowball from somewhere, hit a target, that sort of thing. Maybe we've got to craft a bow at some point as well. I don't want to encourage fighting the Ravagers or fighting each other, so I might avoid using weapons. But yeah, there's lots to think about. I'm really keen if you have any ideas on some of these objectives or thoughts on the game as a whole. I'd really appreciate knowing what you think. because, you know, this is just the starting phase of the designing of the minigame. So I'm very keen to get as many ideas as possible. Yeah, thank you for watching. And like I say, if you've got any ideas, please leave them in the comments.